Hello, welcome back to the Board with Paint HeroQuest painting series. Today I'll be showing you how to paint the Rogue Heir of Elethorn expansion character. We'll be covering both the male and female characters today, and as you can see, I've already primed the miniatures as I have in the previous videos. If you look at the card artwork for these characters, you'll notice that they have a slightly different skin tone. We'll start by base coating the female skin in brown rose, which I like to use for paler skin tones. For the male rogue, I'm using Cadian Fleshtone from Citadel. Other than the skin, most of the techniques and colors we're using are the same for both characters. So during this video, I'll usually only show you one of them. For the upper green part of the pants, I'm using Algae Green from the Army Painter Speedpaint line. While I'm not actually speed painting this model, I am using the speed paints in a couple of places where I don't think we need a lot of detail and can get away with one coat. For all of the dark leather parts like the boots and the belts and straps, I'm using Dryad Bark. You'll see here I'm also using this color on the bracers. For the rest of the pants, I'm using Noble Skin Speed Paint. This ended up drying a little darker than I liked, but I decided to just leave it. For the fur around the neck, I'm using Ashen Stone Speed Paint. I find the Speed Paint to be most effective for highly textured surfaces like fur and hair. For the shirt, I'm going for a warmer white, so we're going to base coat with Iraqi Sand. I'm using Citadel Steel Legion Drab for the overcoat. Keep in mind that some of these colors don't cover that well, so in a lot of cases off camera, I'll apply a second coat after the first coat dries. For the hilts and cross guards of the knives and daggers, I'm using Vallejo Game Color Glorious Gold. I also did the gold highlights on the shirt with this, but I think I forgot to hit record. Sorry about that. Then for the rest of the metal, we'll do a base coat of Leadbelcher. For the trim around the shirt and around the coat, I'm using Khaki from Vallejo Model Color. Here I'm painting the lapels with Baneblade Brown. Moving on to the hair, I'm covering most of the raised areas in pure white. This will serve as an undercoat for the colors we're going to put on top of it. And here I'll show you where I'm putting the highlights on the female character. Once that's completely dry, I'm applying a Seraphim Sepia wash to all of the hair to bring out the shadows a little bit more. Now we'll zoom way in and do the eyes with Ivory. Remember, if you happen to make the whites a little bit too large, you can go in with your base skin tone and clean it up. The front of the boots have some trim and a design on them. I decided to use Khaki for this. Now we'll move on to some highlights, starting with the shirt. We'll begin by mixing some Ivory into the base tone Iraqi Sand. There's actually not that much white shirt exposed on the miniature, so I'm essentially putting a little dot of this highlight into each area of the shirt that isn't covered by gold. And here we'll do a second highlight by mixing in a little bit more Ivory. We don't want to create too stark of a contrast, so we're actually not going to go all the way up to pure white for this. Using the Ivory should make it look white enough to the eye. Now moving back to the eyes, I'm using this Micron pen to dot in the pupils. Just as before, if you make the dot too large, you can fix it with Ivory or fix it with the skin tone if you go outside the white area. The ink from this pen takes longer to dry than the acrylic paint we're using everywhere else, so be sure to give it enough time to dry before you go in and fix it. Of course, you can always use pure black paint if you don't have the pen. Next, we'll highlight all the leather by mixing Baneblade Brown into the Dryad Bark. This will be applied anywhere we have upward-facing areas and anywhere you want to draw interest. Pay careful attention when highlighting the belt and the satchel. You want to make sure you get highlights on all the edges. Now we'll just repeat that again over a slightly smaller area after mixing in some additional Baneblade Brown. To highlight the trim on the shirt and the coat, I'm mixing some Ivory into the Khaki. For the trim on the jacket, I'm trying to keep this on the edges that are mostly upward facing. On the back of the coat, I'm focusing just on the places where the coat raises up, like where it's draped over the legs. And we'll do this again by mixing in some more Ivory. Be sure to keep the highlights in a smaller area than before. We also don't want to forget to paint the emblem and the trim around the boots. There's some stitching on the bracers that we missed earlier. I'm painting them now with Iraqi Sand. Now I'll move on to highlighting the jacket by mixing some Karak Stone in with the base Steel Age and Drab color. Here we'll focus on the tops of the arms and on the peaks of any folds on the back of the coat. We'll also be sure to highlight any of the upturned surfaces of the coat, like it is on the female rogue's leg here. Since we want smoother highlights on the jacket, we'll apply more layers of highlight than we did on the previous areas. I'm not doing anything new here, I'm just repeating the same process over a slightly smaller area. You can repeat this as many times as you like, lightening the highlight each time, and just stopping when you feel like you've achieved the desired level of contrast. Now I'll do a little bit of highlight on the lapels by mixing Baneblade Brown and Ivory. And here I'm mixing in a bit more Ivory for a second highlight. We'll try to brighten up the fur around the neck by covering it with Ulthuan Grey. You'll want to basically apply an overbrush to this, staying out of the recesses. To provide more depth to the hair, I'm applying a highlight of Ivory around the crown area. You don't need to worry too much about blending here because we're going to cover this up with another coat of the Speedpaint. While that dries, we'll get out our Agrax Earthshade and use it to selectively apply dark lines between all of the transitions between different materials. You can also apply this over the entire area of anything leather. This will both darken it and ease the transitions between the highlight layers. Now that the hair is dry, we'll apply another coat of Ancient Honey to it. I noticed the handles of the weapons were unpainted, so I decided to just hit them with some Army Painter Speedpaint Grim Black. Once the hair is dry, we'll reapply Ivory to anything that we want to be highlighted. This will include both raised areas of the hair and the crown area that we covered earlier. Now we'll try to add some interest to the weapons. We'll start by thinning down some Payne's Gray ink. You can see here from the diagram what I'm trying to achieve on the blades. We're basically going to try to create a transition from dark to light on opposed sides of the blade. This is a technique that's sometimes used in non-metallic metal, but it also works for true metallic metals like we're using here. As always, when we're using ink, we want to wick off any excess moisture on a paper towel. Now we'll glaze the ink on opposite sides of each blade. After allowing the glaze to completely dry, apply it again to the darkest area of each side of the blade. We'll build this up over several layers. Now we'll do the opposite on the light side of the blade by mixing some Runefang Steel and Leadbelcher together and thinning it down with some water to try to create a glaze with it. Now we just apply successive layers to the lighter part of the blades. Once that's completely dry, we'll go in with some pure Runefang Steel and edge highlight all of the edges of the blades. We'll also want to carefully highlight the seam that goes down the middle of the blade. If anybody knows what that's actually called, please let me know in the comments. And here we're returning to the hair and applying another coat of Ancient Honey. With this third and final layer of Ancient Honey, we should have a pretty good highlight on the hair at this point. Now we'll move on to painting the skin. On both miniatures, I'm applying a wash of Reikland Fleshshade around all the areas of skin, making sure to get a dark line between any areas of transition. While we wait for the wash to dry, we can paint the base with Hall Red. Now we'll move on to highlighting the skin of the female rogue. First, we'll reapply our base color of brown rose over anything that got too dark from the shade. Next, we'll start highlighting by adding some Flayed One Flesh to the brown rose. We'll highlight all of the fingers, the ears, the nose, the cheekbones, the forehead, and the chin. Or as I like to call them, the sunburn areas. To accentuate the eyes and lips, I'm using some Hall Red to draw a very thin line around the eyes. It can be useful to mix some flow enhancer in with the paint so that you can draw thinner lines with it. If you're too nervous at this point to mess with the eyes, you can call this an optional step. And here I'm applying some of the Hall Red to the lips. Now we'll just continue the highlighting process over several layers, adding a bit more Flayed One Flesh each time. And this is about where I stopped on the female rogue. Next, I thinned down some German camo black brown and drew in the eyebrows. Now we'll move on to the male rogue. For him, we'll be mixing Kislev Flesh in with the base Cadian Fleshtone and creating our highlights that way. The process is virtually identical to what we did with the female rogue. We're just using a couple of different colors. Also, in this case, I'm leaving out the hall red around the lips. And let's not forget his eyebrows as well. Now we'll use Vallejo Model Color Gold and highlight any of the gold areas on the weapons and on the outfit. This is a slightly brighter gold than the glorious gold we use from Game Color. As a final touch, I'm going to go through and dark line between any areas of transition that I think need some separation. I'm thinning the German camo black-brown to an ink-like consistency using water. Here I'm just adding some separation between some of the hair and going around and just filling in dark lines wherever I feel like they need it. You can consider this an optional step, but I think it really adds pop to the miniature. And that wraps up the Rogue Heir of Elethorn. I hope you all found this video helpful. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe to my channel, and click the notification bell so you know when I release new videos. You can follow me on the various social media platforms. I will post some things there from time to time. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, happy painting.